Psychology and is a professor of psychology, clinical psychology and business management. He's going to set the tone for the next 10 minutes, talking about the evolving role of HR manager. Thank you very much, and over to you, sir.
Well, thank you for having me. Today I'm going to discuss the aspects of human resource management which are often neglected both in literature and regrettably in praxis. Let's start with the phrase, human resources. Human resources is an oxymoron. It's a contradiction in terms. Resources are objects. Money is a resource. Raw materials are resources. These are resources. They're objects. They're inert, they're unmovable, they are useful, and so on. Humans are not objects, at least the humans I know. They're not objects. So there is an inherent tension in the phrase human resources. The human resources manager must treat humans humanely and yet at the same time use them as resources, as input into the manufacturing process, manufacturing of products, manufacturing of services, doesn't matter. You must treat the resources humanely and you must treat the humans as resources. And this creates enormous tension, enormous contradiction in the job description of the human resources manager. Now, of course, the phrase human resources has been coined in the 1950s and 1960s when there was a fad or a fashion of what was known at the time as industrial psychology. The process of manufacturing was broken down to tiny units, and these units were analyzed mathematically, and the whole process was optimized, totally ignoring the humanity of the workers involved in the process. They were considered to be the equivalent of machinery or the equivalent of finance, money. So they were dehumanized. The human resource management field started as a form of dehumanizing workers. And it took many decades to transition from this approach to humans, to human workers, to the current approach to human resources, which is much more expansive, much more humanized, much more attuned to psychology, sociology, and other disciplines, much more nuanced, and requires a lot more subtlety. Let me describe to you a few of the new functions of human resource management. Now, of course, we know that the main job of the human resource manager is to hire people and to fire people. These two functions are not as simple as they sound, because you need to exercise judgment as to who is fit to hire and who should be fired. You need to do it in a way that is not disruptive to the organization. You need to have a long-term horizon or a long-term view as to the human resources needs, the labor needs of the company you work for. And you need to integrate the hiring and firing decisions with the needs and requirements and operational dimensions of the other departments in the corporation or the firm. So hiring and firing is not as simple as it sounds, but even as complex as it is possibly the simplest task in the modern human resource manager's desk. Because the human resource manager nowadays has to fulfill at least 10 other functions which did not exist in the 1950s and 1960s and 1970s and 1980s and even 1990s. The human resource manager has to be a therapist. He has to know how to work with people. He has to take care of the problems of people in family life, socially, psychologically, and so on. He has to be there, and he has to definitely act as a kind of proxy or surrogate psychotherapist. It's very common for a human resource manager to cope with the psychological problems of workers in the absence of support from a mental health practitioner or professional. It's a very common situation. The psychology of the worker, the mental health or the absence of mental health of the worker, are very crucial for the functioning of the organization. You ask any human resource manager and they will tell you that there are difficult employees who are bullies, narcissistic, or even psychopathic, employees who are depressed, employees who are overachievers and underachievers, employees who are lazy and who are industrial. The psychological profile of the employee is very crucial, not only to the management of the employee, not only to the extraction of optimal or maximal benefits from the employee, but to the overall functioning of the organization. A single disruptive, difficult employee can destroy an entire department or even an entire factory. Fact. So, psychotherapy, that's a new function of the human resource manager. The next is the educator. Human resource managers nowadays are expected to educate the workforce. They're expected to offer seminars and lectures and to open internal academies and to reskill workers, to teach them new skills and to provide a career path which is integrated with educational opportunities, to work hand in hand with universities and external academic institutions, etc., etc. Education, ongoing, continuing education, and reskilling has become a crucial part of a human resource manager's daily routine. So now we have two new functions which did not exist in the 1950s and 60s: education and psychotherapy. Let's go on. Today, the human resource manager is also an extension of law enforcement. He's an extension of the police. For example, if there is a situation in the workplace which involves sexual abuse or sexual misconduct, the human resource manager is expected to take care of it, is expected to involve law enforcement, is expected to establish protocols in-house, is expected to educate the workforce, and so on and so forth. Enforcement and law enforcement have become a crucial part of the work of the human resource manager. And when the human resource manager fails to tackle in-house misconduct, let alone in-house crime, then the repercussions for the human resource manager are great and unpleasant. So here's a third job. This has not been the case in the 1980s or 1990s. This is a totally new function. And it is defined in legislation in multiple jurisdictions. For example, in the United States, you have Title IX. Title IX obliges the human resource manager in the United States to establish protocols for dealing with discrimination, sexual assault, and multiple other offenses, and then to implement these protocols internally, in-house. Here's another function. The next function is as a buffer. Human resource manager used to be considered, until about 20 or 30 years ago, used to be considered a part of the management. And the management and the labor force were enemies. They were hostile. It was a constant war zone. The labor force unionized itself and went on strikes. The management suppressed the labor force or replaced it in case of a strike. That was the game plan. Today the situation is a lot more complex and a lot more nuanced. Labor is involved in decision making by law in countries such as Germany. In other countries, the labor force is considered to be a stakeholder in the company. Many people who are employed by modern day companies own stock in the company or stock options. The lines between owners, managers, and workers, these lines have blurred. This situation, this new situation, which started in the 1990s, has redefined the role of the human resource manager. Now the human resource manager serves as a buffer between management and labor. The human resource manager is a shock absorber. He isolates. His role or her role is to isolate situations before they get out of hand, to contain them and to make sure that the reverberations and repercussions of these situations do not destabilize and disrupt the corporation or the firm itself, the organization. So the human resource manager, in his or her function as a shock absorber, is always there, attuned to both management on the left ear and workers and labor on the right ear. And then he tries to create a modus vivendi, a modus operandi, a consensus which characterizes the organization. Sometimes this consensus is actually codified in a charter, and the charter serves as a guideline to everyone involved as a stakeholder in the company. Human resource managers nowadays deal not only with the labor force, they deal, for example, with suppliers. Many suppliers are integrated into the organization via computer systems and otherwise. So, human resource managers nowadays, they manage stakeholders, not only labor. They manage suppliers, they manage regulators, they manage legislators, they even manage to some extent the media, and so they work hand in hand with the public relations department, and so on and so forth. The next new function, my presentation is focused on new functions of human resource managers. A new function is an information channel. The human resource manager became a kind of internalized medium, like media. So his role or her role is to inform, keep everyone informed, keep everyone updated, and introduce transparency into the organization, communicate on a regular basis, create expectations of stability, certainty, determinacy. And so the human resource manager communicates regularly with all the interest groups within the firm and with all the external stakeholders in the organization. And he does it in a way that would render the organization stable, predictable, and safe. Information channel, or if you wish, an editor-in-chief of some medium. That is a new role of the HR manager. The next new role is as a filter. Now, human resource managers have always filtered people. They filtered new workers. They were the ones in charge of job interviews. They published job descriptions. They took charge of tenders and auctions, looking for new employees or new suppliers. So they were in charge of filtering. They were like a membrane. That is a traditional role of the human resource manager. However, in the new version of the human resource manager, the 21st century version, the human resource manager filters not only externally, but also internally. In other words, the human resource manager structures the flow of communication and information within the organization so as to render decision making much more efficacious and to optimize the overall output of the organization. So there is an external membrane. If you want to work in the organization, you have to be interviewed by the human resource manager, and it's his or her decision whether you will be employed or not. That's an external filtering or external membrane, but there is also an internal filtering or internal membrane function where the human resource manager makes sure that everyone know what they have to know, need to know basis, and in order to function optimally. And finally, the final function of the human resource manager, which is relatively new, started in the late 80s actually, is as a social organizer. The human resource manager organizes parties, celebrations, promotion-related events, promotional events, manages in many cases the social media of the organization. So a social organizer. It is believed nowadays that the modern human resource manager in the 21st century should convert his organization or her organization into a community. So the human resource manager should be pro-social and communal. He or she should augment and enhance the cohesiveness, the coherence, the synergy, the collaboration of everyone within the organization. And some of the tools to accomplish this involve all kinds of joint activities, a hike, a common trip, a party, whatever. So a social organizer, a wedding organizer, if you wish, a matchmaker. All these new functions mean that the human resource managers of the 21st century should possess human skills like empathy, the ability to connect, compassion, attentiveness. Whereas the human resource manager of the 1950s and 1960s was a kind of glorified bean counter, a person who was more into figures and numbers and the bottom line of the financial statements, someone who was harshly controlling of the work environment, who hired and fired without remorse and without compunction, this robotic figure who was there just to make sure that the organizational flowcharts were all, in place. Today, the human rights manager is perceived as more of a friend, more of a companion, more of a therapist, more of a helping hand. The human resources manager of today is the human rights manager of today. It's a smiling figure. It's a compassionate figure. It's an empathizing figure. It's a shoulder to cry on. It's a hand to lend in case of trouble. It's someone who's attuned to the pulse of the organization and emphasizes the psychological and social dimensions of managing the workforce rather than cold, calculated figures cast in stone. The humanization of the human resource manager is now, in the 21st century, complete. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Sam.
Thank you
very much for that.
Thank you.
I think, as most of us must have suspected, the role of the HR has gone from freezing wording to a helpful kind of person, and to guide to the role that we are now, is not just recruiting and firing people, but also helping them acquire the right kind of skills. I think since we're talking of skills, it's a very good time for me here to pump in that, as you all know, part of what we do at CIAPS